Hi, morning, everybody. Welcome to the session today, the design surgery on technology. I'm Mateo from the PPC team. I think yes, the session is being recorded. We've had some questions come in through the Slido. That if you want to ask a question, that's where you need to go. So it's slido.com, and the hashtag is MHHS Tech. So if you want to ask a question, MHHS Tech is where you need to go. All one word. That's where you can ask questions for today. We've had a few come in already, which is good. So thank you for that. I guess we'll kick off.
Thanks, Amity. So I'll introduce myself. So I'm Robert Golding. I'm the lead solution architect on the programme, and I'll hopefully be answering the questions today with the help of some of my colleagues. So shall I just go down the list in Slido and we'll see how we go? I think it's probably the best way to start off, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of take us through them, and then
okay, yeah, just take it from the top, then, Amity. It'd be great.
So yeah, the first question is the DIP technology doc covers interactions initiated by the sender to the DIP. If the response by the DIP to webhooks are erroneous, how can market participants respond? I think it's asynchronously.
Right, so that is actually covered in the end-to-end solution architecture document, and I can put it up on the screen. Hang on, if I share my second screen. So in sections 4.2 and 5.14, this is described. So this is hopefully everybody that's on the call has read the lovely end-to-end solution architecture document, which talks about message channels and the progression of messages from sender to the DIP, and then from the DIP to recipient. And what this question is asking, I'm guessing, is that when the DIPs relays a message to the sender via webhook, there's the potential of an error being detected by the webhook, or the message can be successfully received by the webhook, and then it can be consumed by the recipient. And in that scenario, it can still detect an error, and how are those errors communicated back to the DIP stroke the sender? I guess that's what the question is saying. So you have a choice. The webhook can either send an error code back as just a normal HTTP response, if it can process the message within the API call, and it just needs to flag which message is causing an error in the response. And we put out some guidance about response codes and return messages, and obviously we'll be firming up in that in the future. And if the message is processed asynchronously by the recipient here, then there's an API to send a status message back. Again, that status message will contain the details of the message, its unique reference, and then the DIP will need to will know the details of that message, and it will know where to send a message back to if it needs to go back to the sender. So hopefully that's answered that question.
Great, thank you.
I don't know who's asked it, but
well, yeah, we'll see we get to if anybody does want to follow up, but yeah,
okay.
We'll move on to the next one. The second question is, as a supplier organization, how can I derive the volume metrics and NRFs relevant to my business from the end-to-end NFRs relevant to my business from the end-to-end NFR docs provided by the MHHS programme?
Okay, so in the, let me see if I can get the spreadsheet up quickly. It's lucky I've got it open. And that's the security. So in the spreadsheet, hang on, if I open it up, it shouldn't take me 2 seconds to open it up. Excuse me, sorry about this. Sorry, I would. here we go. So this is the end-to-end requirement. So how do you know which ones are applicable to particular services or particular parties? So column G says whether a requirement is relevant to a particular party. So all of them tend to be, especially the top ones on the list, are applicable to all parties. It says all services. And lower down there are more specific ones targeted at different services as well. So if you're looking at an SDS or ECS, there are specific requirements for those services, but everything else is broad brush and applies to all services. With regard to the question regarding to volumes, we haven't actually put any guidance out, but on volumes, we did some early estimates on the volumes we're expecting to flow through the DIP. We were specifically looking at interface 21, which I think it's 21, which is the half-hourly consumption data, because that is, we estimate, sort of 95% of the volume through the DIP. So if you're having to deal with a service which deals with the consumption data, then we have put estimates out there for that, and I think we're estimating that every meter will send a half-hourly consumption meters every day on average. So if you've got 10 million meters in your portfolio, you'll be dealing with 10 million messages a day. That's the only guidance we put, because the data volumes we know that flow through the DIP are really quite small for in terms of messaging systems. So we haven't really explored volumes in too much detail, really, because I just don't really think it's a particularly area of concern.
Great, thank you. The next question is, the DIP technology document covers interactions initiated by the sender. What about interactions initiated by the DIP? So for example, what is the feedback mechanism if these have errors?
So I looked at this question. I actually can't think of an interaction which is initiated by the DIP, because everything follows the pattern that I put on the screen earlier. Hang on a second, I'll bring that back. Yes, yeah, everything is initiated by a sender. There's nothing initiated by the DIP. The DIP is just effectively the postman on all the interactions. Sean, do you agree with me on that one?
Yes, I think so. I suppose perhaps possibly the only exception might be when on the replay functionality and one of the interfaces that we think might leverage that. But even in that case, that would still be in response to an initiating request from a party. So yeah, I think I agree with you.
Yeah. So the DIP doesn't actually initiate anything itself.
Brilliant, thank you. What is the process if the subscribing party is not available to receive a message from the DIP? Would it be held in queue till the receiver is back up?
Yes, it's a simple yes. Again, that's covered in the end-to-end solution architecture document. We're going to adopt a simple back off and retry mechanism when it comes to connections, and messages will be stored in the output queues. I think we've got a retention time of 2 weeks, so hopefully the messages wouldn't have gone stale in 2 weeks.
Brilliant, thank you. And just a reminder, if you'd like to submit a question, it's www.slido.com, and the hashtag is MHHS Tech. So that's MHHS Tech on www.slido.com. And you can also vote up questions if you see ones that you think are particularly pertinent to you that you'd want asked, rather than asking the same question twice. So feel free to vote. The next question is, can you clarify the difference between a publication, a report, and an interface?
That's a good question. This is probably it's a legacy question, really, that's existed on the program for quite a while. So different people have wanted to call how parties interact with the DIP by different terms, and in order to have a standardized set of terms, the program has used the terms interface, report, and publication. So an interface is where, again, this diagram on the screen is useful to show what an interface is. It's when a sender sends a message or an event to the DIP. That is what we call an interface. A publication is the reverse. It's when a message / event is sent from the DIP to the recipient. So one is the ingress of messages into the DIP, the other one's the egress of messages from the DIP. A report, well, a report's a bit more of a generic term. So there will be reports in the DIP for reporting purposes, audit reporting as well. And there is a set of reports that will be published by the DIP, originating from BSC central systems, and they will be reported via a mechanism we've called pattern B, whereby a message will contain a payload of a URI which will link to a report in a web location.
Brilliant, thank you. Next question is, can you confirm that DIP is a message broker and does not store data? It says process map for IF15 and IF16 interaction contradicts this.
Yes, it is a message broker, and it does store data, because we have got it stores data. Obviously, when a message is being transferred over the DIP, it is obviously stored in the system, and we've also got an archive of messages for which we're using the it's used for the message replay facility, and obviously for audit purposes, non-repudiation, etc. I'm not sure what IF16, 15, 16 specifically is. Sean,
So
do you know what 15,
yeah,
16?
So that's the replay of some consumption data for the for the advanced data service. So yeah, it's effectively leveraging the fact that the DIP has got this sort of short to medium store of a message history and replaying that message, those messages.
Brilliant, thank you. What reporting capability will the DIP have to support performance assurance monitoring where reports are currently provided by the DTN?
Yeah, so this is going to be the next phase of design, where we actually got a DIP service provider on board. When we provide the next level of design in terms of what we require for reporting, and that will include performance assurance, etc. So that's going to be covered in the next tranche of design.
Great, thank you. How is the lapsing of service provider appointments managed? Such capability is an ARC level component, so why is it not included in end-to-end one?
I think this is more a businessy question. Sean, do you want to answer this one? I've got a funnel E001, so that's
your end-to-end document, I think. So
yeah, so that's this one. It's on the screen now.
So I think the reason, well, firstly, the reason it's not included in the architect in that end-to-end is that it's functionality that's specific to the registration service. So that end-to-end document is exactly that. It's a high-level end-to-end discussing common functionality, primarily around the DIP and message communication, whereas the lapsing of appointments is specific functionality that sits wholly and solely within the registration service, and the way that works is documented in a number of locations. So I'd suggest that people had a look at the registration service requirements, and there's also some detail in the additional information tab of the interface document on how lapsing works. So I think those would be my two go-to places, would be the registration requirements document and the additional information tab in the interface, and that should well, the requirements wholly describe it, but I think they're perhaps individual requirements are strung together in a perhaps a more understandable way in the additional information on the interface document. So I think I'd have a look at those, and if there was still any outstanding questions, to raise those questions off the back of reviewing those two documents.
Thank you. There's a question here, which is a request if we could present the tech docs, as some attendees may have not seen these in advance.
Okay, so hopefully everybody. So the two main ones for the audience today are the end-to-end solution architecture document, which went out in the tranche of documents with tranche 4 at the end of it was about 3 weeks ago now, wasn't it? And this is the document on the screen at the moment. Obviously it's a fascinating read and a great document because it's written by myself, and it just covers the interaction between parties and the DIP and how that's meant to work. So what type of things we cover in this document? Just a quick look at so I would have had some slides prepared if I hadn't that question was coming up. So the document talks about the TOM at a very high level, which hopefully everybody is aware of, and it talks about the different actors that are involved in the TOM, and it talks about the different services that the actors are meant to undertake, and it talks about the different workflows that Sean and Co and the BAs have been working on over the last year, and it just presents them at a very, very high level to say what are the interfaces coming out of each of the business process, and what are the principal actors, and who's involved in those business processes. So it's at a very high level. So it will give any reader, if I'm interested in such and such, I come from this background. It helps people at first sort of sight where MHHS affects them. So, and there's a table at the bottom here as well, which says a summary that says, if I'm a ADS, for example, these are the message channels that I need to interact with in terms of publishing messages, and these are the messages that I'm going to receive. So it gives them a sort of high level view of where to start looking in terms of the business process and the messages they need to exchange. And then it talks about the messaging architecture, and then the diagram I showed earlier about how messages are orchestrated between sender and participant via the DIP, and it talks about different responsibilities, message structure, and the different APIs that we're going to stand up to support the exchange of messages. On the back of that, there was.
Is it worth signposting? Sorry, Rob. Is it worth signposting people to the technical deep dive session that was held 2 weeks ago as well? That should, if people didn't get an opportunity to attend that, I think that's either on the website or on the YouTube channel. So that might be a good place to start if people haven't had much exposure to this sort of stuff. I think it was called the technical deep dive, wasn't it, Rob? I think, but
that's right. Yeah, and there's a presentation. I remember doing a slide deck for that. It seems like a while ago, but even though it's probably 2 weeks ago.
It was only 2 weeks ago, believe it or not. So yeah,
I think that last week, so I can excuse me.
That should be on the I think it's definitely on the YouTube channel, possibly also on the website as well. I don't know. We could probably get URLs out off the back of the meeting.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, would concur with that. All the previous sessions are uploaded on both the website and on the collaboration base. So if you do want to look them up, yeah, you can. It should be fairly accessible in that sense. The next question is end-to-end architecture documents or ARC documents state soft limits, which may become hard limits used to encourage data to be spread across the day. How will this work via a system and it says perf assurance? I'm assuming that's performance assurance.
So hopefully this won't need to happen. So this, I think, this is specific to these the submission of the half-hourly consumption data. We've obviously got concerns that everybody's going to submit all the half-hourly consumption data in the same half hour of the day. So we want to avoid it. Obviously that won't happen, but we're encouraging participants to spread their load out across the day, rather than having to put it all into certain periods. So this can be enforced. API gateways typically can put in blocks into API calls if you've come up against a certain limit. So it is possible, but realistically, hopefully it won't be necessary, and participants will be spreading their loads across the day.
Great, thank you. Next question is, can you summarize how digital certificates will be issued and managed for participants?
Kev, you on the call for this one?
Hi, Rob. Yes, I'm on the call.
Thanks, Kev.
So the current working assumption is we're looking to follow what was done for faster switching with the SWICI. The actual publishing of certificates might work in a slightly different way, i.e. the provider, but we are expecting to follow the same people process for management of digital certificates. I'm happy to take further questions on that, even if that's offline.
Great, thank you. Will the DIP integrate with the DTN, e.g. where data flows are being retained, or is it participants' responsibility to send to both based on use case?
So I think the DIP won't integrate with the DTN, but Sean, do you want to answer the second part of that question?
Yeah, effectively, the DTN and the DIP will as things stand will coexist together. So participants will need to send DIP or MHHS interfaces and publications via the DIP, and where they're required to send a DFlow, that'll be required to go over the DTN. That was sort of the retention of certain DTN flows was a sort of an element of the design that was inherited by the program from previous work, and so yes, I think that's even from I think it's always been envisaged that at least in the short to medium term there would be they would exist side by side. So hopefully that answers the question.
Great, thank you. This question is about the half-hourly data subscription service. What flexibility will be built into this? So, for example, can you opt out of half-hourly data for MPAN's build using D10 register readings?
Sean, that's you again, I think.
No, you won't be able to. You'll either opt in or opt out. But I don't understand why a supplier would want to opt out, because that's giving him visibility of the volumes that have gone into settlement. So really, supplier should be taking that data and reconciling it, and ideally reconciling it against his own consumption records. So no, I think it's an all or nothing interface. I think with the slight exception for LDSOs who will get only a subset of the information. But from a supplier's perspective, you'd get all interface 21s, and I don't understand why suppliers wouldn't want that.
Great, thank you. We've got a question which says question 2. I'm not sure which one that's relating to, but it says question. I'm assuming it's the second question that was asked today about NFRs, but it says question 2 was very specific to suppliers. Is there any way an NFR filter, or is there in any way It says in NFR filter supplier specific 1.
Sorry, I don't understand the question. There's the spreadsheets, and as I said before, that column, column G, it tells participants whether a requirement applies to all services or just to suppliers. There are no, we haven't in the end-to-end requirements. There are no specific requirements just for suppliers, but there are obviously other functional requirements for suppliers, but this workshop doesn't cover those.
Okay, if that person wants to type that message again in a different way, do let us know.
I don't know whether it's just worth again doubly signposting to the document that Rob mentioned, that there we have the design team have created sort of high-level requirements documents for suppliers and LDSOs. Now, obviously, they're intended to be a kind of I don't know, a starting point for those organisations. Obviously, each supplier will have their own intricate, you know, set of systems and processes. But we've tried, the purpose of those two documents, the supplier requirements and the LDSO requirements, is to effectively provide a bit of a starting point. So I definitely urge people to have a look at those, the most appropriate, you know, suppliers to look at the supplier requirements, as that would be a good starting point for understanding what they would need to do and how they would need to adapt their, you know, their own processes and systems for you know, for MHHS.
Great, thank you. Where positive processing is not replayed to a sender, how are system issues across the sender, DIP, and recipient, for example, managed to ensure issues are ID'd and resolved?
Where positive?
So I don't know. Do you want me to have a go at that, Rob?
Yeah, I don't quite understand. Not sure I quite understand it. Sorry.
So messages sent to the DIP will, if they're successful, will have a positive acknowledgement. There'll be a handshake back to the sending party to say, yes, this message has been received onto the DIP. If there's any error or if there's any error, or, you know, the construction of that message is defective in any way, if there's any reason why the DIP can't accept that message accept that message, you know, for onward processing, then there would be an error response provided with details of what the issue was, whether it was a data issue or a structural issue. So there should be no scenarios where a sender is left in any doubt as to whether that message was successful or not. In terms of situations perhaps where a message is rejected, then obviously it would be for the organisation getting the rejection to then, you know, investigate that, and there will be there'll be a support service around the DIP if that sender needs to ask for further advice or support in resolving a rejection, or getting advice and support to understand what the rejection means. So yeah, there'll be a service support framework around the DIP that will be able to offer that service. So hopefully that answers that question. Anything else you wanted to add, Rob? I think
no, that's fine. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah.
We might have lost Amate there, folks. Amate, if you're speaking, you're on mute at the moment.
Sorry, I am on mute. Thanks, Kev.
No hassle, mate. I was worried I had to jump in there for you. Go ahead.
So this next question is that we use a third party to process JAWS billing, so i.e. Repo2. So they need to access this one report. Are they likely to need services of a DIP connection provider?
Possibly. Is that the person that question just can reach out directly and just give me the precise scenario, and we can advise accordingly.
As well, I'd just say, I don't know, the question's gone now, but it's basically the organisation would receive the entitled organisation would receive the reports that they were sort of that they were entitled to receive, if you like, and then they would be free to pass that on via another mechanism to any third party service providers. I don't think at the moment we're saying that we would allow those third party service providers to come and collect that data in the first instance. Perhaps that's something we could look at further if there was a bigger demand for it. But effectively, let's say if a supplier was passing data off to a third party for validation or cross-referencing purposes, if a third party was providing that service, then the supplier would download the data from the DIP, and it would be up to the supplier then to pass that data on via whatever mechanism was agreed with their third party.
Yeah, and we do have the mechanism where we do allow market participants to provide access for third parties on their behalf for specific mesh channels as well. So they could potentially use that mechanism as well.
Great, thank you. It says MHHS Design Artifacts Library have MHHSP end-to-end 1, end-to-end solution architecture version 1 PDF, but they're saying that in this session version 2 is being shown. So they're asking where they can find version 2, or I guess the difference between the two documents.
Is Simon on the call? Simon, you on the call?
I am. I'll go and have a check, but I thought it was version 2, but I'll go and double check and confirm.
Because I know version 2 went out with the transfer documents, didn't it? So isn't that on a different site to the?
I think they're just calling out, Rob, that the one you've got on screen is version 02, but I think you were just using that for example as an example. The version that you've got on screen is version 0.2, but there is a later
version. That's the version that went out in transfer. So it should be there.
Yeah, I think Sean's right. I think we just named it as version 1 because it was officially being released, but it should be the same document.
Okay. I thought version. Oh, well, we'll sort it out. Okay.
Great, thank you. So just a reminder, if you do have access to the slider, you can upvote questions that you would like asked, that other people have asked as well. And yeah, it's hashtag MHHS Tech. This next question is, will the DIP use async API? And they're given a link to asyncapi.com. And they've said, for example, pub, sub, or just RAML open API based REST.
Right, so we are just using Open API REST. We're just using Open API version 3. We had back in last year, we had some quite lengthy discussions at TDWG about whether we were an event-based architecture or whether we were message-based architecture, because Open API Sync really applies to more like event-based architectures rather than message-based architectures. And we've been discussing what type of sort of integration pattern would work for MHHS, and I think it was just generally decided that a message-based architecture pattern would fit better than a event-based. All that being said, one could equally, in some situations, an event-based architecture could fit a message-based architecture and vice versa. But in terms of the interfaces, we're stuck with REST APIs because it's a more mature pattern and it's what people know.
Great, thank you. The BPs call out how the errors would be sent when sending data to the DIP. Would the DIP send any positive acknowledgement when the data is recovered successfully by the DIP?
Yes. So as you mentioned earlier, Sean mentioned, when we go back to this diagram on this being shown now. So when a sender sends a message to the DIP, they get a positive acknowledgement back, and they will get a handshake message back from the DIP, which will provide them with a transaction ID for their send unique reference, and that provides the handshake.
Great. How does the replay of flows work, especially for missing flows scenarios where the receiver is not expecting any? Would the DIP expect a positive acknowledgement from the receivers?
I can't think of an occasion where a party is not expecting any. That would all be picked up in testing, I'm sure. If a receiver gets a message it's not expecting, I think that's quite I don't think that's a scenario we're expecting really. Replay is something different. So a replay is just the replay of certain messages that meet the criteria specified by a participant requesting the replay. The actual mechanism for replay is be an API call, or it'll be a request via a web interface, and the messages can be replayed via the API, or there's actually talk about the messages being replayed via the standard channel on the screen as well. Again, that'll be worked out in the next level of design.
Great, thanks. There are duplications in custom block IDs and data item IDs. Will the program reconcile these to ensure unique identifiers?
Maybe this one if you want, Rob. Yeah, yes, I think is the yes, I think is absolutely the answer to that. I think we've already done some. We've already identified a small number of these already in our own internal follow-up reviews of the interface document. So yes, I'd urge people to highlight these in their comment responses just to make sure there's nothing that we haven't missed. But yes, absolutely, we would be looking to tidy up those errors.
Great. Which message broker will be used? Is it Solus, Azure, or some other?
That's a great question. At the moment, we don't know. At present, the program is undergoing a procurement process to get a provider in to provide and supply the DIP, and we're entering the BAFO stage at the moment, where the potential bidders are putting in their final bids, and we'll be making a decision in the next couple of months.
Great. It says the link provided in the email from MHHS Design last Tuesday shows many documents. Not all refers to physical interface specifications. Which document covers it?
Simon, you on the call again?
Yes, sorry, what was the question?
The link provided in the email from MHHS Design last Tuesday shows many documents.
It's showing I think it's showing the supporting documents view page, but everything entitled there, physical interface or with the document number E2E003 will be the physical interface files.
Great, thank you. Has any consideration been given to the increase in DIP interactions when the migration would be carried out during the transition period for NFR calculations?
I don't think we see a great increase in. I don't think that's an issue.
Okay. Will you be looking to create collated requirements for data services and metering services too?
Sean, you on that one?
Yeah, I think we have, and they've been published. So there are specific requirements documents for effectively for each MHHS market participant. So again, I don't know. They would be in the collaboration base or on the website. But yes, there are requirements for both the data service and the metering service. Absolutely.
Great. Has there been any discussion around providing the end consumer with access to their half-hourly data via the DIP?
There's quite easy answer, no, there hasn't. To access the DIP, you have to be a BSC party.
I think that's not to say that that there's functionality within the DIP that couldn't be leveraged further down the line, but that's not in the current design.
Great. Are there provisions in place to prevent unintentional spamming to the DIP, which could prevent other data being received and processed and risk to settlement?
Kev, do you want to pick that one up?
Sorry, guys, I didn't catch all of that question. Could you just throw that one at me again, please?
So are there provisions in place to prevent unintentional spamming to the DIP, which could prevent other data being received and processed and risk to settlement?
Yes. So there's a multitude of technologies that will prevent DDoS, spamming, all that type of unwanted behavior.
Great, thank you. If there is an issue in sending DIP messages, how will this be relayed to the impacted parties? Will there be dedicated contacts or service desk escalation routes?
Absolutely. So as part of the function that as a DIP service provider, service desk is being set up, and there's going to be a whole host of service desk facilities in terms of sending out emails, portals that will alert users to certain conditions. So yeah, it's covered.
Thank you. Will a participant only be able to reject an inbound message using the validation messages defined in the interface doc?
They would reject inbound. They'll be able to reject inbound messages using validation messages, so that there's no other way of rejecting a message rather than either a response code or using the response API.
I think it sort of depends on the context that the question is asking the question. So again, I'd perhaps refer people both to Rob's end-to-end document, and there's a sort of briefer summary in the interface document that talks about the different levels of validation that happen. So I think the answer to the question is it depends on the nature of the nature and the reason for the rejection. And I'd suggest you have a look in Rob's document around error handling, in the end-to-end architecture document for error handling, and there's a kind of a briefer explanation of it in the interface document as well as to what the different sort of levels of validation are.
Great, thank you. The end-to-end, it says SA, describes that arrays of messages will be sent or received over a single HTTP call. Are there any rules around which messages can be grouped together?
No, there's no restrictions. You can group any messages how you see fit, as participants see fit. People might want to split them over separate HTTP calls. That's what I would do, but everybody designs their systems differently.
It says it's confusing. It's confusing that the MHHS Essential Settlement Service (CSS) is the same acronym as faster switching central switching service? Also, what is the interaction between both, if any? So it's a bit of a tongue twister there, but essentially we've got CSS for central settlement service and central switching service, and that's confusing. Is there any interaction between both, or if any?
Yeah, so I can answer my part, and then Sean can probably have his penny's worth as well. So I try not to use the acronym CSS in my documentation. I try like to use the acronym ECS. And CSS, as far as I'm concerned, is central switching, and as far as I know, there's no interaction at all between the two. Sean, what do you feel?
Yeah, no, that's correct, and I'm surprised that if we have used central settlement service in that context anyway, I'd urge people to flag it up so that we can change it, because we shouldn't. That's something we were specifically trying to avoid. So yeah, as Rob said, we've tended to refer to CSS as CSS, as in the central switching service, and ECS, Electron Central Systems, in terms of settlement. So if there are any instances of that have snuck through in any of the 100+ documents, then I'd urge people to flag that up in the comments so that we can correct it for everyone else's clarity. And yes, there is no direct interaction between the settlement service and faster switching. It's all sort of brokered or managed through via the registration service and the DIP interfaces.
Great, thank you. As a supplier organization, how can I derive NFRs and SLAs expected from my organization? For example, storage volumes, message volumes, response times, etc.
But we had this question earlier. As I mentioned earlier, the end-to-end functional requirements in this spreadsheet, column G informs which services are applicable for each supplier. So there tend to be all services here, and there are some requirements around response times, message volumes, etc. In terms of, go on, Sean.
No, I was just going to say, sorry, Rob. I mean, an element of this is obviously proportional to the size of the supplier, and whether that supplier thinks he's going to be, shrinking, growing, and to what extent he thinks he'll be shrinking or growing. So there's an element of this that is linked to the supplier's own forecast of what he thinks his MPAN population will be over the coming weeks, months and years, and so there's that would be how a supplier would model it, is based on how he expects his business to expand or contract. And then in terms of response times, all the response times in terms of sort of maximum and minimum, expected response times and maximum cut-off response times are all documented in the operational choreography document. So I think that would be my answer to that question, is that suppliers are going to have to, Rob and the team have done modelling at the gross level, and we don't in terms of looking at the total population of MPANs and the traffic associated with it, and have sized the DIP capability based on that, based on those metrics. But it'll be for each supplier, as I say, based on his own forecasts as to whether he thinks he'll be growing or shrinking, to do their own modelling and look at the choreography document to see how that then impacts their own individual organizations, I would say.
Great, thank you. It says the end-to-end essay describes that, oh no, I think we've had that one already. Will there be any health status monitoring UI or API provided? How will consumers know there's a problem with DIP services without contacting or spamming the service desk?
Yes, so at the moment we are in the process of defining these, because it's got to feed into the contract for the DIP service provider, and there'll be a portal that participants can log into to find out whether there's any issues with the service or not.
Great, thank you. What would happen when delivery of messages from DIP to any receiver, for example, supplier fails?
So again, I'll point the person that posed that question to the documents. That's all explained there, because we've got the different points along the processing thread that a message can fail. It's all covered there.
Great, thank you. So we're down to our last few. So as I said, www.slido.com. The hashtag is MHHS Tech if you've got any questions there. So supplier DIP ECS consumption. It says where ECS or MDS successfully processes data, how is this positively acknowledged back to the sending supplier? For example, acceptance.
Okay, so Sean, do you want this one? Because unless there's a specific,
I thought you were going to pass this one to me. So yeah, again, I think this was probably discussed at length in the various design workshops, but there isn't a formal acceptance of that data back from the MDS. So the supplier will get an acknowledgement that it's been accepted by the DIP, and then the absence of a further sort of error message back from the DIP, the supplier can be assured that you know that the consumption data's made it into the MDS and will be processed accordingly. So it's yeah. So I think the acceptance will be that it's been received by the DIP, and then, as I said, there's per Rob's diagram, there's a number of stages at which the DIP might subsequently reject it, but in the absence of one of those rejected, the supplier can assume that it's reached the MDS successfully and will be processed.
Great. And then the final question we've got up at the moment is that without acceptance, how can a sender distinguish between successful processing and system issues with the DIP and or recipient?
Well, I guess I don't know whether we're talking specific. I think we're probably still talking specifically about that last question. As I say, I think it was partly. I think it was discussed at length in the working groups and looking at the volumes of acceptances and things and the likelihood of rejection. And I know it's the team have worked to set the validation and things as much on the data service side as possible. So yeah, I think if people still have genuine concerns about that, I would suggest they feed them back in the comments in the comments review. But that was the decision taken by the design working group, was that the MDS wouldn't formally, it will reject in certain circumstances, it will reject stuff back, but like I say, in the absence of getting a rejection within the specified time scale denoted in the operational choreography, then the supplier can assume that message was successful. If people, as I say, that was the design that was settled on within the working groups. If people want to challenge that, or I would suggest that they feed that back in the comments review, so that so that feedback can be taken on board as part of the wider comments assessment.
Great, thank you. So those are all the questions on Slido. Just want to ask if anybody in the room has any questions that they'd like to ask, which you can raise your hand for. But if not, we can wrap up. So yeah, any final questions? Doesn't look like we do. In that case, thank you for attending. This was hopefully a useful session. We'll make sure we upload the recording for this, and there will also be the questions that have been asked today answered in written form too, which we can refer back to. Any questions, feel free to get in touch. And yeah, thank you for attending.
Thanks all. Cheers.
Thanks everybody.